She said divorce would level the playing field financially. I quietly submitted the ownership restructuring documents I finalized months earlier. The court confirmed my sole stake. She looked confused when equal division applied only to shared debt. You know what the problem is with you? You've always had more. And divorce is finally going to fix that. She said it so calmly, like she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. Like it was the most reasonable thing a person could say to someone they'd spent 11 years building a life with. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her across the kitchen island. The granite countertop I'd picked out, the kitchen I'd renovated 2 summers ago with my own hands and my own money, and I felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as the absence of surprise. Because I wasn't surprised. Not even a little. That's the part that hit me later, when I was sitting alone in my car in the driveway, staring at the garage door. I wasn't surprised. I was just finished. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 38 years old when Vanessa told me she wanted a divorce. We'd been married for 11 years. No kids, a decision that had been mutual at the start and then quietly one-sided toward the end, though I hadn't let myself fully understand that yet. I owned a small but profitable specialty manufacturing firm, custom fabricated parts and components for commercial HVAC systems. Not glamorous, not tech startup money, but consistent, scalable, and entirely built from a business I'd inherited from my father and then rebuilt from near bankruptcy over the course of a decade. Vanessa worked in marketing, mid-level director at a branding agency. Good salary, not extraordinary. We weren't wealthy by most definitions, but we were comfortable, and the lion's share of that comfort came from the business. She knew that. She'd always known that. The comment about leveling the playing field didn't come out of nowhere. It came at the end of a conversation that had started 3 hours earlier, when she told me she'd already spoken to a divorce attorney. Not spoken to as in consulted. Spoken to as in retained. She slid the business card across the island like she was making a move in chess. Whitmore and Associates, Family Law. I picked it up, looked at it, set it back down. How long have you been planning this? I asked. That's not the right question, she said. What's the right question? The right question is how we're going to handle the split of the business fairly. And there it was. Not, how do we save this? Not, can we try counseling? Not even, I'm not happy and I haven't been for a long time. Just, how do we split the business fairly? Like the marriage had just been a slow walk toward this specific conversation. I need to give you some context here, because what happened next matters a great deal more if you understand what the business actually was. My father started it in 1987. He built it slowly, painfully, through 2 recessions and 1 near-catastrophic fire at the original warehouse. When he died in 2009, the company had 41 employees, decent contracts, and about $380,000 in outstanding debt. I was 25. I had a mechanical engineering degree, no savings, and a grief that I still haven't fully excavated. Vanessa and I had been dating for about 8 months at that point. She was supportive. She was warm. She held me together through the funeral and the first terrifying months of trying to understand what I'd inherited. I want to be honest about this part. She was good to me then. Whatever happened later, she was genuinely good to me in that season. We got married 2 years later, in 2011. The business was still fragile. We lived modestly. She contributed her salary, and I poured everything back into the company. For the first 4 years, I didn't take a real salary. I mean that literally. I paid myself the minimum required to cover personal expenses and reinvested everything else. Vanessa knew this. She didn't love it, but she knew it. By 2016, things had turned. New contracts, a retooled production line, a small but critical patent on a fabrication process I developed with one of my engineers. Revenue went from under $1 million to just under $4 million in 3 years. By 2019, we were clearing $6 million annually with margins I was genuinely proud of. I started paying myself properly. We bought a house. A nice house. Vanessa upgraded her car. She took a sabbatical from her job for almost 8 months to figure out her next chapter, as she called it. I didn't complain. I supported it. She eventually went back to work. Different agency, bigger title, better salary. And things seemed fine. Seemed. I should tell you about Derek. Derek was, well, he was my attorney. Not just any attorney. He was a corporate attorney I'd used since 2014, and over the years he'd become something close to a friend. Not a friend I called to complain about my marriage. That's not the kind of person Derek was, and it's not the kind of person I am. but a friend in the sense that he understood my business the way a good mechanic understands an engine, completely and without sentiment. In early 2022, about 18 months before Vanessa told me she'd already hired a divorce lawyer, Derek had flagged something in a routine review. "You know," he'd said, in that low-key way of his, "if you ever wanted to restructure the ownership documentation to reflect the actual founding history of this business, now would be a sensible time." I'd asked him what he meant. He'd walk me through it methodically. The business had originally been my father's sole proprietorship. When he died, it passed to me via his estate. I had converted it to an LLC, which was standard, but the conversion documentation, done quickly during a chaotic period of grief, had not clearly delineated the business as separate property under my name alone. In a community property state, which we were in, that ambiguity could matter in a dissolution. Potentially a lot. Derek was not hinting about divorce. He was not being dramatic. He was just doing his job. "It's a loose thread," he said, "worth tightening." I want to be very clear that I did not begin that restructuring process because I knew my marriage was failing. I began it because it was the right thing to do legally, and because Derek was correct that the founding documentation had holes. But somewhere in the middle of it, somewhere between the first round of filings and the final confirmation, I started paying closer attention to my marriage. Not in a paranoid way, in a quiet, paying attention way. And what I noticed when I actually looked was that Vanessa and I had drifted into a version of partnership that I wasn't sure either of us had consciously chosen. She talked about the business the way people talk about a mutual investment. Our revenue this quarter. Our growth trajectory. When our company eventually sells. It had always bothered me slightly. I'd chalked it up to the natural language of a long marriage. But when I started actually listening, I realized it had gotten more frequent, more specific, more possessive. I finished the restructuring process in November 2022. Derek filed the final documents. The business was now unambiguously, clearly, legally documented as separate property, inherited directly through my father's estate, with the founding chain of title intact and indisputable. I told Vanessa nothing about this, not because I was hiding it maliciously, but because it was a legal and administrative matter that had no impact on our day-to-day life together. Or so I told myself. If I'm being completely honest, and I think I owe you that, part of me had started to build a quiet wall, not out of hate, out of something more like self-preservation, the kind you don't fully admit to yourself until much later. Things got colder over the following year. Not explosive, not dramatic, just colder. Less conversation at dinner, more separate evenings. She started going to her sister Claire's place on weekends more frequently. I started spending more time at the production facility, which had always been my comfort zone anyway. We were polite. We were civil. We went to a company dinner together in March 2023, and several people told us we were a lovely couple. I smiled and thanked them and felt something hollow and procedural about the whole thing. And then, one Thursday evening in August 2023, she came home with a business card and told me about Whitmore and Associates and said divorce would level the playing field. And I sat there across the granite countertop I had chosen, and I felt the absence of surprise. "I want to be fair about this," she said, after the initial conversation had settled into something more subdued. "I'm not here to take everything. I just want what's equitable." "And what do you think is equitable?" I asked. "Half the business," she said. "Obviously," she said, "obviously the way people say it when they want to make you feel foolish for not already understanding. We built this life together," she continued. "My income supported this household while you were reinvesting everything. That has value. Your income supported your lifestyle," I said, carefully. "Same thing when you're married." "Is it?" She looked at me steadily. "My attorney says the business is marital property." "Your attorney should see the documentation," I said. "What documentation?" "The restructuring I finalized last November." There was a pause. Not a long one, but meaningful. "What restructuring?" she asked. I didn't explain it that night. I told her Derek would be in touch with her attorney, and I went to the guest room, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. Not triumphant, not relieved, just tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones after years of something you didn't quite name until it was over. Derek called me the next morning. I'd already texted him the night before, given him the short version. "She retained Whitmore," he said. "Yeah. They're competent," he said, without any particular emotion. "They'll know what they're looking at when they see the ownership documents." "How do you think they'll respond?" "Initially, they'll push back. They'll argue continuity of the business during the marriage constitutes contribution to marital assets. They might try to argue the restructuring itself was a fraudulent transfer. Can they make that case? They can argue it. They won't win it. He was quiet for a moment. You should know, he said, that this is going to get uncomfortable before it gets clean. I know. She's going to feel blindsided. I know that too. And you're prepared for that. I've been prepared for a lot of things I didn't want to be prepared for, I said. Derek, to his credit, didn't push further. The next 3 weeks were its own kind of ordeal. Vanessa went to stay with her sister. That felt both sudden and completely logical. I think we'd both known the house couldn't contain us once that particular conversation had happened. She texted me twice. Once to say she'd be getting her things over the weekend. Once to say she hoped I understood that this wasn't personal. I stared at that second text for a long time. It wasn't personal. 11 years. Not personal. I didn't respond to either message. Her attorney, a woman named Greta who apparently had an excellent reputation in contentious asset division, sent Derek a formal letter within 10 days. Derek summarized it for me over the phone. They were disputing the classification of the business as separate property. They cited Vanessa's sustained domestic and financial contribution to the marital household as evidence that the business had been substantially supported by marital resources. They were also questioning the timing of the restructuring documents. They're going to argue intent, Derek said. Can they prove intent? Intent isn't really the standard here. They'd need to prove the restructuring was designed to defraud a spouse of legitimate marital assets. And to do that, they'd need to establish the asset was marital property in the first place, which is the very question at issue. So it circles back. It always does. What I want to tell you is that at no point in this process did I feel good. I want to say that clearly. There is a version of this story where the guy finds out his wife wanted to take half his business, and he feels vindicated and clever and righteous. That is not what I felt. What I felt was grief. Real, deep, inconvenient grief. For the woman she'd been when I was 25 and didn't know how to breathe through my father's funeral. For the early years of the marriage when things were genuinely difficult and she had genuinely stayed. For the specific version of a future I had built in my head, quietly, over years, that was not going to happen. Grief is a strange companion. It doesn't wait for a convenient time. It shows up in the production facility at 7:30 in the morning when you're looking at a contract renewal, and suddenly you can't quite see straight. Vanessa and I met once more, face to face, about 6 weeks after she left. Her idea, neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, the kind with too much exposed brick and not enough chairs. She looked tired. I probably did too. I want to understand the restructuring, she said, after we'd been sitting for a few minutes with our drinks untouched. Derek can walk you through the technical. I'm not asking Derek. I'm asking you. I looked at her. My father built that business, I said. He passed it to me through his estate. I rebuilt it from near bankruptcy with my own engineering work and my own risk. You contributed your salary to our household expenses. You didn't invest in the business. You didn't take on any of the debt. I supported you emotionally, she said. I gave up 8 months of career to figure out your next chapter. Your words. While you were working 80-hour weeks building something that was ours. That was mine, I said quietly. She blinked. That's a very cold thing to say. I know, I said. I'm sorry it feels that way. You planned this, she said. I did due diligence on a legal vulnerability in my founding documentation. When, almost a year before you told me you wanted a divorce. She was quiet. I watched her process that. You knew, she said finally. You knew this was coming. No, I said. I didn't know anything was coming. I knew there was a loose thread that needed addressing. Derek flagged it. I fixed it. How convenient for you. How prudent of me, I said. For the business my father spent his life building. That landed somewhere. I watched it land. Her expression shifted. Something complicated moving across it that I couldn't fully read. Part of it was anger. Part of it was something that almost looked like embarrassment. I was entitled to that conversation, she said, after a moment. Which conversation? The one where you tell me you're restructuring the ownership of the primary asset in our marriage. It wasn't a marital asset. That's the entire point. That's your position. That's the documented legal reality. She picked up her coffee, held it without drinking. Greta says we have grounds. Greta can make whatever arguments she wants, I said. That's her job. Derek will respond to them. A court will decide. But Vanessa, I want to ask you something directly. She waited. Did you come into this marriage expecting to eventually own a share of my father's business? Silence. Because if that was always the plan, I said, I'd like to understand that. Not to use it against you. I'd like to know. She set down her coffee. She stood up. I came into this marriage expecting a partner, she said. And then she left. I sat there for a while after she walked out. The exposed brick was very exposed. A couple near the window was laughing about something on a phone. I thought about my father. He'd been a practical man. Not cold, practical. The kind of man who could have an honest conversation about money without making it personal and without making it less than it was. I'd always admired that about him. I wondered what he'd think of all this. I think he'd have understood. The legal process moved at its own pace after that. Greta's challenge to the ownership restructuring was formally filed. Derek responded methodically. He had everything. The original estate documentation from 2009, the articles of conversion to LLC, the debt records from the period of rebuilding, the patent filings in my name alone, and finally, the restructuring documents from November 2022 with their clean, unambiguous chain of title. The hearing on the ownership question took place on a Tuesday morning in February. I sat in the courtroom and listened to Greta argue her position. She was good. I'll give her that. She emphasized the marital contribution argument, the emotional labor, the household income Vanessa had contributed, the years during which the business grew substantially within the context of the marriage. Derek countered each point. The founding inheritance, the separate property designation, the pre-existing debt that had been mine alone, the restructuring, filed nearly a year before any divorce proceedings, with no evidence of intent to defraud. The judge listened to everything, took a recess, came back, and confirmed the business as my sole separate property. I will not pretend I had no reaction in that moment. I exhaled. That's it. A long, slow exhale that I had apparently been holding since August. Vanessa was sitting across the room with Greta. I didn't look directly at her, but I heard the quiet that fell on her side of the room. And then Greta leaned in and started speaking quietly to her, and I heard just the edge of Vanessa's voice. What does that mean for? But I thought. And Greta, keeping her voice low and professional. It means we move to the next phase of asset categorization. The next phase of asset categorization. That phrase sounds clean. What it actually meant was that once the business was removed from the marital estate, the court needed to determine what was left to divide. And what was left to divide was considerably less romantic than Vanessa had apparently anticipated. The house, our nice house, had a mortgage that we had taken out jointly. The equity in it was real but modest, because we purchased it at a particular point in the market and refinanced once at terms that weren't ideal. Net equity, around $180,000 after fees. She'd get half of that. Her car, hers. My truck, mine. Retirement accounts, individual, separated accordingly. Joint savings, split evenly. And then the other category, the one that Greta did not seem to have fully briefed her client on. The shared debt. Here's what people don't always understand about equal division of marital assets. It means equal division of everything. Assets and liabilities. Vanessa's 8-month sabbatical had been financed, in part, by a joint line of credit that we'd opened to bridge the gap in household income. $42,000. Still outstanding, minus some payments. There were also 2 joint credit cards, used, largely, for household expenses and a particularly ambitious kitchen renovation, plus a vacation to Portugal that she'd been very enthusiastic about and that I remembered mostly for the excellent custard tarts. Combined balance, a little over $28,000. There was also a personal loan we'd taken out jointly to help her sister Claire through a financial crisis about 3 years earlier. $15,000. Claire had been paying it back in small, inconsistent amounts. Outstanding balance, $9,400. Total shared debt, approximately $79,400. Half of that, $39,700. I want to be clear that I knew about all of this. I had not hidden it from myself. I had looked at our financial picture clearly and without flinching during the 18 months I'd been paying quiet attention. I did not know, until later, how much of it Vanessa had mentally categorized as the business will cover this. Greta had apparently been briefed on the shared debt, but Vanessa's understanding had been, as near as I can reconstruct, that the business valuation would overshadow these numbers so completely that they were essentially irrelevant. The business had been valued at approximately $4.2 million in a routine assessment 2 years earlier. Against that number, $79,000 in debt probably seemed like a rounding error. Against nothing, which is what she now had from the business. It looked somewhat different. The moment I keep coming back to, the one that I have replayed more times than I should probably admit, happened in the courthouse hallway after the second major hearing. The one where the shared debt allocation was formally documented. Vanessa came out of the hearing room, and for a moment, just a moment, the professional composure cracked. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry exactly. She looked confused. That is genuinely the only word for it. Like a person who had read the first 3/4 of a book confident they understood the ending, and then arrived at the last chapter and found something entirely different. She looked at me, not accusingly, just confused. "I'm responsible for half of that debt," she said. Her voice was very quiet, not theatrical, not designed for effect, just genuinely trying to understand. "Joint accounts," I said. "Joint liability." "Yes." She looked down at the floor for a moment. Greta had a hand lightly on her arm. "I thought," Vanessa started. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I knew what she thought. She thought the business would make all of this trivially small. She thought she was walking away with her professional salary, her half of a house, and a substantial share of an established and profitable company. She thought the playing field was going to be leveled. Instead, she was walking away with her professional salary, $90,000 in home equity, her retirement account, her savings, and $39,700 in debt she now had to service on her own. I did not feel triumphant in that hallway. I want you to understand that clearly, because I think the narrative of these stories often lands in a place of victory and satisfaction, and that is not what this was. What I felt was something closer to the way you feel after a very long illness finally breaks. Not good, exactly. Just done. The fever was gone. The damage was visible. The recovery was going to take time. I went back to work the following Monday. The facility was the same as it had always been. The noise of the fabrication floor. The smell of metal and machine oil that I had known since I was a child walking through with my father, not understanding any of it. My foreman, a man named Gus who had been with the company since my father's time and who knew me better than most people in my life, came over at about 9 in the morning and asked how things were going. "Getting there," I said. He nodded. He didn't push. Gus was good that way. He had the practical wisdom of a man who'd seen a lot of complicated situations and had learned that most of them didn't require commentary. "Contract from the Hendricks Group came in," he said, handing me a folder. "Good timing," I said. I meant it. Work has always been the most reliable form of continuity I know. "There's one more thing I want to tell you about. It happened about 2 months after the divorce was finalized. I got a text from Vanessa. Unexpected. We'd had essentially no contact since the courthouse hallway. The text said, 'I want to say something to you, but I don't know if it'll come out right in writing. Could we talk, just briefly?' I looked at the text for about 20 minutes. Then I called her. She answered on the second ring. 'Thank you for calling,' she said. 'What did you want to say?' A pause. 'I handled this wrong,' she said. I didn't respond. 'Not the divorce,' she said quickly. 'I mean, I do think we had real problems. I still think we couldn't have kept going the way we were. But the way I came at the financial piece of it.' Another pause. 'I convinced myself that I'd earned a stake in the business by being your wife. And I don't. When I actually think about it clearly, I don't think that's honest.' I was quiet for a moment. 'Your father built that thing,' she said. 'And you saved it. I was there while you were saving it, but I wasn't. I didn't take the risk with you. I didn't carry any of that.' 'No,' I said. 'You didn't.' 'I was angry,' she said. 'I think I'd been angry for a long time about things that weren't really about money. And I turned it into money because that felt cleaner.' I thought about that. 'What were you actually angry about?' I asked. 'Being second,' she said. 'The business always came first. I know that was necessary. I know you had reasons. But I stopped feeling like your priority a long time ago, and I didn't say that. I let it become resentment.' 'Why didn't you tell me?' 'Because you were working. Because you always had something important happening. Because every time I thought about bringing it up, I talked myself out of it.' I sat with that for a while. 'I'm sorry,' I said, 'that I wasn't more present. That you felt like second place. I'm sorry I came at your father's business like it was mine to take,' she said. We were both quiet. 'Take care of yourself,' she said finally. 'You too,' I said. And that was it. I've thought about that conversation a lot since then. It didn't fix anything. Didn't reconstruct the marriage. Didn't rewrite the 11 years. Didn't make the divorce less real or less painful. But it was honest. Maybe the most honest conversation we'd had in 3 or 4 years. And there was something in it. Some recognition of mutual failure, Some acknowledgement that the version of this story where one person is entirely the villain is never quite the true one that I needed to hear. The business is doing well. We closed the Hendricks contract, hired 2 more engineers. Derek is already talking about a potential acquisition inquiry from a larger manufacturer in the Midwest that has apparently been watching our patent portfolio. I haven't decided how I feel about that. My father spent his life building the thing. I spent 10 years saving it. There's a part of me that doesn't know how to think about it as a transaction. But there's another part, the practical part, the part that sounds like Derek, or maybe like my father on a particularly clear-eyed morning, that says businesses are meant to grow and adapt, and sometimes the right steward is a new one. I don't know yet. I'm still figuring that out. What I do know is this. When Vanessa said divorce would level the playing field, she was operating on an assumption. The assumption was that the primary asset in our shared life was also a shared asset. And that assumption was built on another assumption, that the business had simply materialized during our marriage rather than arriving in it, already formed, already damaged, already mine to carry. She'd watched me carry it. She'd benefited from what it became. And somewhere along the way, observation had become ownership in her internal accounting. I understand how that happens. I don't hold it against her entirely. But I'd spend a year and a half quietly, carefully, honestly establishing the documented truth of the thing. Not to trap her, not to ambush her, because it was the right thing to do for my father's legacy and for a business I'd bled for in ways that don't show up in any court document. The playing field, it turned out, was already level. It just didn't look the way she'd imagined it. Equal division applied to what was actually shared. The shared equity, the shared savings, the shared retirement contributions, and the shared debt, all $79,000 of it, split right down the middle with the same clean mathematics she'd been so confident about when she thought it was working in her favor. That's how equal actually works. Not as a correction, not as a punishment, just as the thing it is. I got home from the office the other night at about 7:30. The house is quiet now in a different way than it used to be. Not the silence of 2 people avoiding something. Just quiet. Actual quiet. I made dinner. Nothing complicated, pasta with stuff from the fridge, and I sat at the kitchen island, on the stool I always sat on, looking at the countertop I'd chosen 7 years ago. And I thought about all of it. The whole thing. My father walking me through the facility when I was maybe 10 years old, explaining something about the fabrication process that I didn't understand but filed away anyway. The day he died and I stood in that office not knowing anything. The years of early mornings and late nights and decisions that terrified me and outcomes that surprised me. Vanessa, at the beginning, holding me steady when I didn't know how to hold myself. The slow drift. The cold kitchen conversations. The business card on the countertop. The legal process. The hallway. The phone call. And then just this. This ordinary evening. Pasta and quiet, and the low hum of a life that still had to be lived. I don't know what the right lesson is, if there is one. I'm not sure I believe in lessons exactly. I believe in consequences. I believe in the documentation. I believe that the things you build are yours in ways that matter legally and personally and morally, and that the passage of time and proximity to something is not the same as ownership of it. I believe that when you love someone and work alongside them and share a life with them, there are things that genuinely become shared, and those things should be divided honestly. I also believe that honesty sometimes looks different than what people expect. It looked like a set of restructuring documents filed in November of 2022. It looked like a court confirming what was already true. It looked like a confused expression in a courthouse hallway and a quiet conversation 2 months later. It looked like this, equal, not tilted, not corrected, not leveled, just equal, which, as it turned out, was not the playing field she had been anticipating at all. There's a photograph on my desk at the facility. My father, probably around 1994, standing on the production floor. He's wearing his work clothes, not a suit, never a suit on the floor, and he's got a clipboard, and he's looking at something off camera with an expression of complete focus. I don't know who took the picture. I don't know what he was looking at, but I've kept it on my desk since I moved into that office because it reminds me of something I can't quite put into words. Something about the difference between building a thing and inheriting a claim to a thing. Something about the weight of actual work versus the proximity to it. Something about my father, who never said much about money but who understood, in the way practical men understand things, that what you build with your hands and your risk and your sleepless nights belongs to you in a way that a court document can articulate but never fully capture. He would have understood all of this, I think. He would have nodded at the restructuring documents. He would have nodded at the court's confirmation. He wouldn't have been triumphant about it either. He would have just recognized it. The way you recognize a truth you've known for a long time finally being said out loud. The business is mine. It was always mine. That's not arrogance. That's the documentation. That's the inheritance chain. That's 11 years of carrying something my father spent his lifetime building, through debt and risk and nights when I genuinely didn't know if we were going to make it. She was there for some of those nights. She was kind to me in some of those nights. And when the divorce came, she got exactly what was hers. Half the home equity, half the savings, half the joint accounts, half the shared debt. Equal. All of it. Exactly equal. And the business, the thing that had always been the business, the inherited thing, the built thing, the documented thing, stayed where it had always been. In my name. In my care. Where my father left it. I finished the pasta, rinsed the bowl, turned off the kitchen light, walked through the quiet house, and went to sleep.